All right, so thank you all for coming. This new collection is set in the Central Valley of California. The opening of the cosmos. You'd have thought me a blushed newbie to look at my face then, and you'd have been wrong. Discolored, yes, but that was an accident on the pommel horse. That was the beating I took from the wind, trying to work my way uptown. If I retracted, I'd retract just like the milk snake's scarlet skin. Welcome to the past. Here is my private self to greet you. I am the spitting image of the night's prehensile lips, ready to clamp you against the solid surface of my palate. And I am the new sap aroused by spring, the hard xylem, the knotty stick whose protuberance sends forth new shoots. Didn't you say you always wanted a child? I can be that too, the whippersnapper who follows you. Or maybe you want the youth who will do your labors and be paid in what little kindness you can manage. Go back and try to snag me while I'm yet unspoiled. The morning's saporous dew, the early strut of the cockerel, the first fugitive act of copulation, which, because it is a first, feels like a last. You picked it all when you picked me out. What satisfied you? What couldn't love you back? The endless act of revising, and with that, the revision. Much of the book is built on the idea of landscape. The idea of landscape that predates the 20th century version. When 19th century painters wanted to do a landscape, they would often have to go out and gather material by sketching various locations and then assembling them later in their studio so that the paints didn't dry out. So these landscapes are assembled in the way that painters once assembled landscapes. They're not literal, they are assemblages, but I'm glad if they feel literal for you. This is called Landscape with Sections of Aqueduct. If the crown of day is not gold, then it's a marvelous fake. Merciful present tense. If the brown grass is always flowing, and if the sun is always just brushing the dry hills, and if last summer's suicide is still a loner whose white t-shirt knotted so tight it had to be cut off his neck with a penknife, then evening is the same bare patch and the same fat crows, the crushed aluminum cans and the hamburger wrappers, or the ribbon of tire tread where a road crew hasn't come by. They have taken him away, and I do not know where he is laid. Among the soft cheat and meadow barley, a live oak begs relief from the hardened light, the beating of its own gnarled limbs, and the unrelenting rustle of its own beige blooms that tumble together shyly like a locker room of boys once boisterous, now called to roll and suddenly bashful, clasping at dingy towels. Let the dead be modest. Give the tree, solitary being who feeds on wind and the moat of another's distant beauty, cause to brag. Except that the kernel would fall upon the soil, it abides alone. One guy peeled labels off beer bottles here, another climbed the remaining concrete piles and wrote Justin loves, wrote Stephen loves, wrote Hang 'em high, class of '93. Cabbage moths flickered in tansy and clustered broom rape, bore the pain of creation for a little yellow dust, a smear of light, on their fidgeting legs and the sudden buoyancy in updraft. Ruin by the wayside you took as sacrament, you abiding rock. I was reading a book on the history of color, and I wanted to do a poem that was intentionally sort of impastoed and drenching in color, like a seed catalog. So that was the impetus for this poem. It takes its title from a film by Bruce Beresford entitled Tender Mercies. And I wrote this poem sort of late in the conception of the book. I realized that by returning to the Central Valley, even as an artist, I was doing some kind of exploitation, just the same as, well, not the same as if someone was putting in a development or putting in a farm, but a kind of exploitation nonetheless. So I had to acknowledge that in the poem. Tender Mercies. The dandelions, ditch-blown brood, the evening snow and dew-soaked flocks, the brewer's pea, the Jepson's pea, these the bright eyes of the Viridian fields, in chaparral, the hillside pea and angled pea, intensities of light and pomp that distress the easy upswept grass. The smack the rain plants as it smudges past and penetrates the canvas. The smattering on field and railroad tracks, both hardy blooms and dainty flowers, the judge's house, the chicken farm, a migratory camp, a flesh motel, a stucco digs where all that mitigates the August swelter is the swamp cooler's immutable burr, a straggling house that draws its water from a hard water well and flushes out with the help of a crude sump pump. Before the flat land is occluded by the staunch of light at end of day, I wanted to be content with all its surfaces, weed, barb, crack, rill, rise. But every candid shoot and fulgent branch depends upon the arteries beneath. The houses have their siphons and their circuit vents. The heart, the literal heart, must rely upon its own black valves. The duodenal canal, its unremitting grumble. The brain upon its stem, and underneath a network vast of nerves that rationalize. The earth's a little harder than it was, but I expect that it will soften soon, voluptuous in some age hence, because we captured it as art the moment it was most itself. Fragile, flecked with nimble weed, and so alone it almost welcomed its own ravishment. I was a maiden in this versicolor plain. I watched it change, withstood that change, the infidelities of light, the solar interval, the shift of time, the shift from farm to town. I had a man that pressed me down into the soil. I was that man. I was that town. They call the chicory ragged sailors here, sojourners who have finally returned and are content to see the summer to its end. Be unafraid of what the future brings. I will not use this particular blue again.